You're listening to Halftime with your host, Mylan Bittenbender, where each week we take a few minutes to step off the field of life and discuss the challenges and joys of navigating life in the middle years. I hope your time with us today will help you develop your strategy for a winning second half. Welcome to the locker room. You're among friends. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today we meet with my friend Charles Barclay. Yes, the Charles Barclay. Probably not the Charles Barclay you're thinking of. Charlie has been a friend of mine for lots and lots of years, and I've gotten a lot of mileage out of dropping his name in many conversations. So we've also worked together at Youth for Christ. I've planted a church. He's planted a church. He's been in ministry most of his life, as have I. And today we talk about his book called Rebuild. And as we spend this time focusing on our middle years, we often find that there's a need to rebuild. But we also find that there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of difficulties that go with the concept of rebuilding some of the very difficult parts of our life that seem to be broken down. And so today we're going to spend some time looking at his book, learning from some of the insights that he's written there, and we're going to do it with some fun stories woven in, and we're going to have a great time together. This is a wonderful conversation I enjoyed very much with my own personal friend, Charlie Barclay. All right. Hey, welcome to Halftime, Charlie. Thank you so much for joining us today. I loved your book. I've always loved you. You've been such a great friend, and it's my privilege and honor to have you. As this is actually the first episode we're recording. I'm not sure it's the first one in the rollout, but
Sure.
It's the very first one that we're recording, and so it's really an honor to have you on today. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh man, thank you. Yeah, like feelings certainly mutual, man. Super excited, honored to be asked to do this at all, but to be the kind of the first one out of the gate, whether or not, like you said, whether it airs first or not, I do expect a T-shirt that says Halftime with a number 1 on it somewhere. So anyway,
I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, with marker. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah. Thanks.
So Charlie and I met in college. We met in college. While I was in college, you were in the neighborhood, and we were introduced by a mutual friend. And right off the bat, I knew we were going to hit it off. I have probably, over the course of my lifetime, laughed at, as well as with Charlie, as much or more than anybody else in my entire sphere. But part of the reason is because Charlie is a brilliant storyteller. His stories are always captivating. I hope I don't oversell him, but Charlie's always telling funny stories that just kind of like suck you in, and you can't wait to see how the situation turns out. And I have no idea how many of them are actually true. He says they're all true, but today we're gonna hear a bunch of them, and so I'm so excited about that. But one story I want to start off with this one story I remember in particular. We used to go to this event together. Charlie and I worked with Youth for Christ together, and we'd go to these Go Mad events. If there's any Youth for Christ kids out there or other leaders or anything, hey, welcome. But we used to go to these Go Mad events. Hundreds, maybe thousands of kids would go to these big conferences. And so it was a big deal, and all the staff would go, and we'd have all these kids. And I can remember this one time, I think it was the time it was hosted in Indianapolis. And we went, and it was, I think we go on a Friday night, and this must have been like Saturday morning. And a bunch of us met down in the hotel lobby restaurant for breakfast. And we're sitting at this big table. There's probably 10 or 12 of us there. I mean, there's a whole bunch, kids and leaders and the whole deal. And we all decided it's Charlie's turn to pray. And so Charlie starts praying. And one thing you got to know about Charlie is he's the real deal. He loves the Lord, and he loves talking to the Lord. Doesn't matter where we're at or when it is. And in this particular prayer, Charlie, you were just passionate, man. You're praying for the kids, and you're praying for the speakers, and you're praying for the conference, and and all of a sudden, just in the middle of a sentence says, okay, I think my food is blessed enough. We got things to do. and you looked up, and the face you got, can you do it? Because
it would probably go something like this, like,
yes.
Yeah. What? Yeah.
It was that face. Yeah. But anyway, it was hilarious. Awesome. And incredibly awkward all at the same time.
Good times.
So Halftime is a podcast about midlife. Midlifers at this point in life are in their 40s, 50s. And so a lot of us grew up in the 80s. I know, Charlie, you're about my age,
Yeah.
and your high time was the 80s. And so I wanted to ask you a few questions,
Yeah.
just about like what do you remember from the 80s as far as like favorite TV shows, favorite bands, favorite brands, stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's the thing, man. I think I may have just, I don't know if I've just gotten stuck. There's a part of my soul that just still sticks. It's stuck in the 80s, man. I love all things 80s. The neon, when the hair when I had it, all of it was great, man. Man, rocking the mullet. But man, I remember like favorite band, favorite concert experience, Oingo Boingo. It's one of my favorite bands. Yeah, Danny Elfman, their lead singer, went on to score almost every major motion picture you've ever heard of ever. So loved Oingo Boingo and their concert, their live shows were unbelievable. Today, I think like I know it's today. The Breakfast Club took place on this date that we are recording this, or
Oh
40
wow,
whatever years ago that is. So I have to give a shout out to that 80s movie, all the John Hughes movies. Yeah. So all things 80s, man. Love them. Love the
yeah.
80s. Yeah. Yeah.
What was one of your favorite 80s kind of activities? Just to kind of bring back what was popular in the 80s, what you kind of resonated with.
Yeah, yeah. I lived and loved riding my bike. We used to do I was a freestyle bike rider. We were sponsored by a local bike shop, and we rode on a half pipe and was to do some tricks and whatnot, all that kind of stuff. Love it, man. I hopped on a bike just a couple years ago and rode a little, maybe not to the level that I used to.
Yeah.
There's a little maybe fear involved, some broken hip or something, but yeah, I remember that it was like that and the skate culture all kind of combined into one is kind of what I grew up in and loved for sure. Yep.
Uh, Favorite brands? What are some of the
Oh yeah. Yeah. Vans. Vans. I still everything Vans. Vans t-shirts, Vans shorts, Vans jeans, Vans shoes. That was great. Swatch watches back in the day. Those were
yeah,
great.
I
Yeah.
remember those.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I remember you told me a story about some
Yep.
Vans shoes,
Yeah.
that you designed some, or there was a thing you tell
Yeah.
us about that.
Yeah. So back in the day, you used to be able to custom order, design your Vans. Like they would have patterns that you could choose, and you could kind of pick what section you wanted each shoe to look like, right? And there was this particular shoe I wanted was very 80s and feel, neon and palm trees and all that stuff. And I loved them, ordered them. It would take a couple weeks for them to get them back at the bike shop where I ordered them from. And so I wore them. At the time, I was a freshman out at a school in a little rural community, and it was like very much like country music and FFA and like that, and like not so much like the creative neon, that kind of vibe. And so I kind of stood out and kind of took some hit for that, some pain and personal anguish. But I love those shoes. And I remember in that moment, I wasn't following Jesus yet at that moment, but I remember just remembering that moment that like, hey man, I was I'm created and designed to be unique, right?
Mm,
And I was made
yeah.
to be this individual. And you know what? You're not always you're gonna have to swim upstream sometimes, right? And so I just remember that. And so I've shared that story over the years. And just about a year ago, there's a church that we had planted, and we were leaving the church we had planted after 7 years. And I had talked about God wiring us and making us unique and all of that. And so as a parting gift, as we were leaving the church, we had mentioned over the years that there's a Corinne, who we'll talk about later as we talk about my book a little bit. She's great at graphic art and design. And I talked with Vans, hey, I want a pair of those shoes because I want to be reminded that it's okay to be unique. And
Yeah.
she's heard me tell that story. And so Van said, hey, it's out of print, nothing we can do about it. But you can use your own artwork. And I said, what if I use my own artwork to just completely duplicate your artwork? And like, that's fine. I'm like, great. And so Corinne heard about that. And on the down low, her and a few other people got together, designed a pair of shoes, had them made for me, and then shipped them to me. And got them on today. I don't know if you guys can
Oh,
see
cool.
that.
Yeah.
I'll show you the
Try.
other side of them here.
There you go.
Yep. Yep.
Nice.
So yeah, so it was just their way of kind of saying, number one, thank you, but also going, hey, you're a unique individual. Yeah, and I don't know if they're like, man, are you unique? But no, like, hey, like we are
I was
designed
yeah.
to be different.
I was just going to say that you are one of the most uniquely unique people I've ever met, Charlie.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take it. Yeah.
So I told everybody you tell a lot of stories. Do you have a favorite childhood or teenage story that you want to share with us? Just maybe something to kind of give us a little glimpse into the life of Charlie Barkley.
Man, so again, not to keep referring back to the book, but there's a guy in there named John. And John
Mm.
was a guy that I hung out with all the time in high school. We were best friends. And man, he was that guy. I always said there's that one friend who's a lightning rod for pain, that if something's going to go wrong, it's going to happen to him. And whether it's physical pain, wiping out on a bike or roller skates, whatever it was probably going to happen to him, right? Well, like he had this awesome, like in hindsight, he had this 1965 Impala, and this thing was awesome, except that it was red, kind of. It was just dead paint. I don't know if you ever heard of. I've never even heard of that. Still have never seen a car like this. Imagine like if you leave like something in the window of your car for like a year and it just fades. His
Oh
car
yeah,
looked like it was
yeah,
faded, and he tried everything. Man, he waxed it, buffed it, nothing worked. And then one night he shows up. We're gonna go out cruising around, and he shows up, and man, this car is popping. It is shining. It looks like he got a new paint job. And I go, dude, what did you do to your car? And this guy,
yeah.
now John is a genius on paper, all right? But sometimes when it works itself out practically, you go, what were you thinking? He goes, I go, dude, what'd you do to your car? And he goes, I oiled it. I go, you what? He goes, yeah. He goes, I was putting some oil in it and I spilled it. And I noticed it when I wiped it up, it was super shiny. So he just took some and spread it all over it. It looked great for like the first 30 minutes. And by the end of the night, there's like bugs and like birds and people just stuck to this car, man. It was like the stickiest, greasiest. And then like it rained like the next day and there was like an oil slick around his car. It was great. But hey, man, for like 36 hours, that car looked sharp. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah. Don't order your car, kids.
You know what's funny? I did a similar thing when we were growing up. We lived backwoods. I mean, we were way off the beaten path,
Yeah.
and you had to travel several dirt roads to get to my house, and so our cars were always covered with mud,
Yeah.
just dirt. You know that dirt that just sticks on there. So the car, doesn't matter what color the car is, it's brown. And so I remember one time it had been snowing out, and the snow was kind of packy, and I'd gotten some, and I put it on the car, and swirled it on there a little bit. Same thing. It kind of like
Yeah.
popped out. The dirt disappeared and it looked shiny and kind of that wet look and everything. So I did the whole car, and it looked great for a few minutes, and then it all dried. now it was dirt swirl,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
was not an attractive look.
That's
But
awesome.
my dad wasn't real crazy about that. I was probably, I don't know, 6 8 years old at the time.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. No, John was
But
17 at the time. So, yeah, not the same. Yeah. Yeah.
well, I
That's
learned I
awesome.
learned my lesson just a little bit earlier. I probably would have done it at 17, but
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, I wanted to have Charlie on today. Wanted to talk a little bit about his book. So you may wonder, hey, Mylan, as you're doing this podcast thing, just getting started out of the gate, how do you choose a guest? How do you figure out who you're going to bring on and who you're going to have share? And Charlie wrote this book. When was it released, Charlie?
Man, just a few months ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
literally beginning of the year. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So because of our experience, and like I said, Charlie's a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun together and stuff. But I also know Charlie's a super smart guy, loves the Lord, and always has great insight. So I got the book right away, and I wanted to read it. And as I'm reading it, the name of it is Rebuild. And you can't rebuild unless you've built something before, and you need to rebuild it again. So we're not talking about starting at the beginning. And really, as I'm reading it, I'm like going, this is this is midlife, man. I mean,
Yeah.
we spend the first 20 years of our life, we're full of passion and vigor and energy, and we've got a dream, and we've got all these ideas, and we go out and we start taking the world, and we start building a family, and we start doing all this stuff, but it's about midlife that for whatever reason, a lot of the things just kind of we begin to hit a wall, or our
Yep.
physical, whatever, all different kinds of things. And so this concept of rebuilding really resonated with me. And I was like, wow. And so the book itself, really, really want to encourage anybody who's seeing this to go out and get the book. But Charlie, I appreciate you writing the book. How old are you right now?
I am 52 at this moment.
52. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's about as midlife as you can get.
that's right. Yeah,
And so obviously these ideas are resonating with you a lot. But I
mm,
wanted to ask you about your motivation for. I got a bunch of questions surrounding that, but
yep.
your motivation for writing the book. What kind of made you go, "This is the book I want to write," and it's your first book, right?
Yeah, it's my first book. Yeah, hopefully of many.
Well
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
Well
Thanks.
done
And
for a first book. It's great.
yeah,
So yeah, what was the intrinsic motivation, or what kind of drove you to sit down and make it happen?
yeah. So man, I mean, the thing kind of has, it's one of those things where there's multiple routes that kind of lead into one thing, right? But I've been in ministry in one shape, form, or another, whether it was volunteer student ministry or part-time or pastoral ministry for 25, 30 years now, and
Mhm.
a common theme that you just keep coming back to over and over and over is people getting stuck. People getting stuck for a myriad of reasons, but I think if you really boil it down, a lot of times it's fear of
Yeah.
what's going to happen if I change this thing, or I say no to that thing, or say yes to this dream, whatever it is. I think we've learned to settle in a lot of ways, right?
Mm,
And
mhm.
I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, or whenever you want me to. But like this whole idea of rebuilding comes out of the book of Nehemiah. I did a series a good number of years ago, maybe
Yeah.
2 decades ago, talking about Nehemiah, and this whole idea about rebuilding was kind of formed in my head. And then, you know how when you buy a new car and you don't notice any of that car anywhere until you buy it, then you see it everywhere, right?
Yeah.
You start
Yeah, yeah.
seeing this theme of people getting stuck and settling, and when you start
Mm.
thinking about that, you start to see it everywhere.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. I've gone through my own kind of midlife crisis. I think I was a little bit late on the curve. For me, it's the last 4 years have probably been one of the most difficult seasons of my life. Very, very challenging.
mm,
And as I talk to other people, I see, and I think that's why I'm starting this podcast right now,
yeah,
is because I'm seeing all of this stuff. And so I'm seeing it in other people, and as I talk to them, I'm hearing it in their stories. I'm hearing a lot of the same patterns and the same things happening.
yeah,
So break down that. So what about the story of Nehemiah? Break that down a little bit for us.
yeah,
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe even travel back in time a little bit, back to when you preached that
Yeah.
series. Don't preach the whole thing right now. I know you
You
could,
got time.
but
Yeah.
um, kind of
Okay.
give us the thumbnail of how that whole thing unfolded, how that story unfolded, and how that leads to this concept of rebuilding.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we do that, I want to put a pin in that and go back just a minute or two to something you said real quickly when you were talking about kind of this idea of like, hey, over the last 4 years, it's been difficult for you. You feel like,
Yeah,
that midlife crisis. And I think there's really something to be said when we talk about midlife crisis is this image of a guy who's going to unbutton his shirt down to his belly button, get some chains and a Corvette, right? But it
yeah,
really is, I think, this idea of people starting to realize like, hey, I've been building my life for decades. What if that ladder's up
mhm,
against the wrong wall? Or what if I've
yeah,
put some walls in the wrong place? Right. And that's a real catalyst for the book is that,
sure,
people kind of, because we've all gone through, well, again, I don't have a vet convertible, not for the lack of trying, maybe, but I'm not,
yeah,
I'm not going out to look to get a motorcycle or any of that stuff. The real crisis for me is like, man, have I invested my life in my years well up to this point? You start
mhm,
thinking through that, and that's where the crisis happens, I think. So just wanted to
yeah.
really talk about that because people have an image what a crisis is, right? So anyway, back to the Nehemiah point. Thanks for asking, Mylan.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say, did Jen tell you about the vet? Did you know I got a vet?
oh, oh
No, I'm
man,
kidding.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, for sure.
I've thought about it a lot, but I don't have
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
resources to do
yeah.
so.
It's
Anyway,
of
back to
course,
Nehemiah.
yeah. So yeah, so Nehemiah, when we started that series, it's interesting. Nehemiah, I mean, is famous for leading the rebuilding of the wall and that, right? But I mean, there were the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon, and they kind of came back in three waves. Zerubbabel brought some folks back, and then Ezra brings some people back, and then Nehemiah comes back. And Nehemiah has a pretty great gig, right? Like he's living
Mm,
out, and he's removed from all the hardship there in Jerusalem, and there's no call in Nehemiah. There's
mm,
no voice from heaven, right? He gets news that the walls in Jerusalem are broken, and it breaks his heart. And so,
okay.
because his heart is broken, he wants to investigate and poke around. And in Nehemiah chapter 2, when he gets there, the walls and the gates are now people have lived there. The temple has been rebuilt. They've lived there for a good chunk of time, right? 70 years
Yeah.
maybe. The temple's been rebuilt, and people are having families and they're marrying. Like life is kind of resumed. But as Nehemiah tours the city, the rubble is still so bad in the streets that
Mm,
the horse or the donkey that he's riding on can't even pass through the streets. He has to get off and walk around it. And man, that really just struck me, even as a younger man, that man, we learned to live with some junk in our life, right? And
yeah.
the
Yeah.
Israelites, the people of God, the people who are supposed to be the expression of what it looks like to be God's people in the world, had learned to just settle with what
Mm,
getting by. Like, hey, this is the minimum of what it takes to be able to live in Jerusalem. And they weren't safe. They were putting their families at risk. There's a whole host of issues that comes from settling.
yeah.
They kind of go, that's good enough. And we could do a couple hours of me telling you areas of my life, both big and small, where I go, that's good enough.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
that's where it comes from. That's where this whole idea comes from. Is I've seen people settle in their spiritual life, in their family life, in their work life over and over and over again, myself included.
Yeah. Yeah, I just I put a survey out a couple days ago, giving people an opportunity to kind of share their thoughts because I want to gather information about so that I can know how best to
Yeah.
present this podcast. What kind of speakers can I get? What kinds of things can we talk about? And I sensed a lot of that in some of their responses. That in people's responses, I don't want to settle in this area, or I
Mm,
feel like I have settled in this area, and I'm not satisfied with that. I'm not happy with
yeah.
that. And I do think one of the key things that happens in midlife is we tend to get this feeling of dissatisfaction, almost like you said, okay, I've built all of this, but has my ladder been up against the wrong wall? Am I climbing this ladder to a destination that is, man, I'm up here now, and it doesn't look the way that I thought it would. It's not as satisfying as I thought it would be. There's more challenges or more trouble in my life than I thought there would be. And so now we begin to look and think, man, I've got limited time here. you
Yeah.
know, um, Now I'm beginning to see that I'm not indestructible, and that life does have an expiration date, and I only have a certain amount of time, and I want to make this life count.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So the story of Nehemiah. Then, was there any more you wanted to share about that, as far as how that kind of led you? Because I don't think you reference the story of Nehemiah in the book, right? But
I
that was
don't.
kind of the impetus for the
Right.
concept of rebuilding. So how did
Yeah.
that kind of roll into the rebuild um, kind of concept?
Yeah. So yeah, there is no reference to Nehemiah or any scripture in the book, right? It's based on
Mm,
some biblical principle for sure. But that's by
sure.
intention, right? That's by intention. I want to
Yep.
make the book approachable to people who might be scared off by faith or been hurt by church or by that. And I see it a lot like this. I don't know. When we were talking about Youth for Christ earlier, I don't know if you remember a guy by the name of Dave Ron. Uh,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
he did a training for us at YFC called Three-Story Evangelism. Do you remember that? And he said
I
there's
do.
our story, God's story, and the people's story that we're trying to serve. And I'll
Yeah.
never forget this sentence. He said, "There's more to people than their sin, and there's more to Jesus' story than their cross." Now we know that those are the seminal moments of both, right? We know that that
Absolutely.
is the issue, but there's
Yeah.
more than one way to connect. And so it's very much like when Jesus heals lepers and says, "All right, folks, hope you enjoy it," and only one comes back. Or there's
Yeah.
the guy around the pool of Siloam. He says, "Do you want to be well?" And he heals him, and he's up. And so you see people that Jesus is removing or providing, I should say, a practical solution for something in their life, and then leveraging that to be able to share the good news about the kingdom. And I'm hoping to do the same. Like I maybe
That's awesome.
not giving sight to the blind or anything like that, but at the same time going, hey, this can be crippling, and this is a real pain point in people's life, and I want to see you set free from that. And I hope then that will give us an opportunity to talk about Jesus, which I think really gives us real freedom. Yeah, so that was the
Yeah.
impetus for transitioning from Nehemiah to that.
Well, and some of those things are the same things that I feel about, why we're doing this podcast. That I do feel like a lot of people have settled in ways I've settled myself, but
Yeah,
I'm like going, I don't want to live the rest of my life in this position. I believe that there's more. God has more, and
yeah,
we can
yep,
experience more. And so I think, having these conversations with people like you, I admit right off the bat, I don't have it figured out.
right.
Um, a
Oh,
huge
sure.
part, a huge part of me doing this podcast is me saying, okay, um, I want to figure this out. And obviously, I'm studying the scriptures, but I've been doing that for years. Obviously,
Mhm,
I'm praying. I've been doing that for years, listening to the leading of God. But I'm also finding that there's tremendous power in listening to other people's stories and coming alongside them, and not just hearing their story, but like literally coming alongside them and experiencing life through their perspective, their eyes, and
mhm,
and then learning from them what they've experienced and what they've learned through their story. Um, and everybody's story, like you said, is very, very important. It's powerful,
yeah,
and we can do a better job of connecting those. And I hope that's what happens with this.
yeah,
So I want to talk about a few of the different things from your book, and
sure.
give you an opportunity to sort of unpack them for us as well.
Great.
Chapter 1 starts out with the statement, "I've been robbed, and so have you." And then you go into this whole thing about fear,
Yeah,
and which I thought was brilliant,
yeah,
because I see myself as a little bit of a tough guy, a little bit of I'm a pretty well put together guy,
yep,
and yet below the surface, there's a lot of fear. And over the last year or two, I would say, as I'm kind of re-entering ministry and kind of coming out of some of the things that have been challenges over the last couple years, man, that voice of fear is louder than it's ever been.
mhm,
And I think some because of some of the things that have happened to me, but also a little bit because of this concept that, okay, I've only got so much time left. I don't want to blow it. I don't want to
yeah,
screw up.
yeah,
And yet that will keep us from experiencing everything, that God has for us, and the things that we can. So unpack that
mm,
concept for us a little bit more, and kind of where your heart was at in writing that.
yeah. I mean, as we're recording this right now, the men's Final Four basketball tournament is going right now, and every year, without fail, you will watch a team who is getting beat by a higher seed. Right? They're
Mm,
getting beaten by the team that's the underdog, and they come out and they get tight. Right?
mm,
They only got 7 minutes left, and they're down by 10. 10 is not an insurmountable amount of points in men's basketball. It's really not.
right.
But when you tighten up and you go, man, we only got 7 minutes left, and you start to act uncharacteristically, I think that's what happens to some of us when we start to think
Yeah.
about, man, what's left on the scoreboard, and we start to think about like, man, what am I going to do, instead of just going, hey, I tell my kids this all the time. I've got a 24-year-old daughter, a 19-year-old son, and an 11-year-old daughter, and they have heard from me from the cradle. Don't die with potential. You don't want to die with potential.
Yeah.
You leave it
Yeah.
all in the field, and if you're going to do that, there's going to be some failure along the way. And if we'll recognize that failure is the norm, if we go, hey, it's just part of the process, that relieves us of some fear. But
Yeah.
I mean, people are afraid of not only failure, people are afraid of success. Like what happens if I get successful? How's that going to change the way that I live? How's it going to
Mm,
change how I'm approached, or how I'm viewed, or how am I going to have to adapt my life and reorganize things? And it's craziness, right? We get in our
yeah.
own head and we play out scenarios that are never going to happen. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. I don't know if that even answered your question, Milo, but I hope so.
Yeah, it does. I want to challenge you to do something here. I want you to talk to the person that has that voice in the back of their head every time they start. Like, for example, you writing a book.
Yeah.
A lot of times we get to this point in our life and we have less energy. Our energy is decreasing at this point. We have more experiences, but we're busier. We've got so many things going on, and to write a book, or to start a new business, or to fix a relationship that's been broken for a long time, or there's all of these different things that we can do, and fear has a tendency to just put a wall up when we
Mm.
think about what it's going to take to jump in there and do it. So talk to the person who maybe feels that wall, or feels that resistance, or feels that, or hears that voice in the back of their head when they think about doing that big thing, that important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have to come to the place where we recognize that fear is a liar, right? Like the whole
Mm,
goal of fear
yeah,
is to keep us from doing the thing that we're created to do, the thing we know to do is right.
yeah,
That doesn't mean that it will go easier. It doesn't mean you're not going to be without some scars, or that you're not going to have some failure or get redirected. And just know that, like, whatever it is, if it's that relationship that needs to be repaired, like, you need, is it worth it to go through a fire to get on the other side of it to see it repaired? I think
yeah,
absolutely it is, right? And I
yeah,
think, and I guess my experience is always that, like, our fear is of the unknown. So is, and you're never going to have all the answers. You can prepare, you can get as prepared as you want for that next step. There's always an element of a step of faith, so to speak, right?
yeah,
I love. Here's what I love. I love in the movie, the Lord of the Rings, when Frodo and Samwise Gamgee leaving to begin the adventure. They've not experienced anything that should incite fear, right? And they stop in a
yeah,
meadow. They stop in a
yeah,
meadow, and Sam goes, "This is it." And Frodo says, "What do you mean this is it?" And he goes, "If I take one more step, I'm going to be farther away from home than I've ever been."
mm,
And some of us are so afraid to be farther away from the familiar that
yeah,
we're willing to live in some really dysfunctional ways. We're in a job that we don't like. We're in a relationship that's just coasting by because we're afraid to go one step farther. And so here's where the fear comes in my experience, is that we think 100 steps down the road. And it may not be that your relationship, well, I can tell you for a fact that your relationship isn't going to get fixed overnight if you've coasted for 15 years, right?
yeah,
Maybe it's one date night. Maybe you just go, hey, you know what? We haven't been out together in so long that let's just have a date night. Or maybe it's saying I'm sorry. Whatever
yeah,
that thing is, it's one step. It's not, it's just cracking the door and see where it goes. I think that's where
mm,
we get locked up, is that we think the 100 steps we have to take, when all you really need to take is one next step farther away from the familiar, from the comfortable, from the safe than you've ever been.
yeah, absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right?
Yeah,
And
for
a lot of
sure.
times that first step is the
For
hardest one.
sure. For
So
sure.
chapter 2, change happens.
Hmm.
Um, and that's another thing as we get older. And I don't think of myself as old. Yet
Yeah.
my kids do. you
Right.
know,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
the 20-year-old version of me would.
Yeah.
But change, because we view change differently. Change, but at the same time, change happens. So unpack that just a little bit. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, the example
yeah,
I use is the oil change in the car. Change is going to happen, and so you can either be proactive and be a part of the change and guide the change and change the oil, or you could just wait till your car breaks down on the side of the road and go, "What happened?" Well, I mean,
right.
change is going to happen; it's inevitable. And so, I think if we plan for change, then we can guide it at least, right? And again, it doesn't mean it always turns out the way that we want, but we're
Yeah,
intentional about going, all right, I'm not giving up the driver's seat, right? Like, I mean, of
yeah,
course, God's going to direct me and lead and guide me. But I'm not just going to sit in a raft and let the river take me wherever it goes, right? I've been given charge of the gifts and abilities that I have to steward them and to live my life as best as possible. And so I'm going to have to adjust and make the change that I want to see happen in my life. And so in those, and we may get to this later, and if we are, then shut me down. But like, I talk about the six big rocks, like the
yeah,
six different hats that we wear, and whether that's husband and dad and coach and pastor or whatever that thing is. You go, listen, in those areas, you're going to have to change some things, right? If you're going to continue to be effective, we have to continue to change. It's different parenting my 24-year-old than it is my 11-year-old. So I have to
Yeah.
change. And so if I don't change, I'm just going to drift and the relationship
Mm,
isn't going to be as close and I'm not going to have the influence. I have to be intentional. And
yeah.
I think, especially as we get into midlife, we go, like you said, the energy levels go down a little bit, but I don't think we have to surrender that we're not going to have any energy. And then at the
Right.
same time, I think something else we kind of do is we go, hey, I've lived this long to kind of build this rhythm that I have, and I don't want to change it.
Mm,
I think
yep.
that's the slow death kind of thing, man. Is just getting stuck in a rhythm that is unchangeable.
Well, and I think the kind of energy we have changes, right?
Hmm.
My physical energy is different than it was
Hmm.
15 years ago,
Yep.
but I feel like in certain ways I'm able to see things clearer. The energy that I have in that area, the wisdom, I guess you'd call it,
Yeah.
is different. So I think it's a matter of making the kind of changes that are necessary to go from using one resource to working on. Being able to improve another resource and use that resource effectively, and see those transitions along the way. Again, I think part of the reason why these conversations are so helpful,
Yeah.
because we can see how other people are learning those kinds of lessons about you know uh, using the different resources they have to continue to work with the change that's inevitable in life. So okay, chapter 3,
Yeah.
11 miles, and in parentheses, laying down to die. Wow, that was powerful.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh man, it's a hard chapter. Like I got sucked in to the story of Robert Scott, who was an explorer in the early 1900s, about our age actually,
Yeah,
and he wanted to be the first to get to. I will really condense the story that I have in the book, but
yeah.
he wanted to be the first to get to the South Pole, and then there was there was another guy who wanted to get to the North Pole, and some guys got to the North Pole first, so the race was on to the South Pole. So Robert Scott and his men are racing down to the South Pole, and as they're getting there, they're a few miles out. They're leaving depots of food and supplies that they'll need along the way for the return journey. And so, long story short, is they start getting close to the South Pole, and I'm like, can you imagine what it's like? The
Mm,
excitement to be in a place where like nobody else has ever walked. Like you were really exploring new land. And as they're getting close enough to the pole, they see something in the horizon, and one of the guys in the crew gets out the binoculars and opens and starts to look and scan the horizon, and he sees a flag waving, and they realize a few miles out that they've been beaten
oh,
by a little bit more than a month, less than 5 weeks, I think, out that they had been beaten by the other crew. And
wow.
so they drudge on and they get there and completely dejected. And
Mm,
man, can you imagine the walk back? Um, how much colder it felt knowing that you didn't quite accomplish it. And as you read through
yeah,
Scott's journal, and there's some excerpts of Scott's journal in the book where you just feel that weight of like just getting the wind knocked out of him, and so they're trudging back, and it's like 40 below zero. I mean, it is bitter cold. And I talk about this too. They brought an extra guy with them that they had planned, so they were a little light on food, and there's a blizzard, and one guy starts to get gangrene in his foot. Another guy falls down and gets hurt. He ends up passing away, and so they have some things go wrong, and
mm,
he ends up lying down in the tent, and they're 11 miles away from their next depot to
mm,
get some food and resource. These guys are hungry. They're running out of energy. They're freezing cold. They're sick. And each day they look out, and it seems like the blizzard intensifies. And at some point, they realize we're never getting out of here. And the journal entries just reflect that they laid down in the tent 11 miles from their next
mm,
destination and died. Yeah,
wow.
never got out. It's crazy. Like it's agonizing to know that, like 11 miles isn't that far, but 11
Right.
miles is an eternity when you've had the wind knocked out of you and when you've had the your dreams stolen from you. And so I know that there are people who are
Yeah.
listening to this who know what I'm talking about. To go, man, I felt like life was going really well, and I had the rug pulled out from underneath me, and it feels like 11 miles to get up and go to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
long 11
Yeah.
miles. And I just don't know if I have the energy to get out of bed to make a relate. Like Charlie, you're talking about making a relationship work. You're talking about starting a business, writing a book. Man, I just had my life pulled off underneath me. And I would say that the next step for you is just to put foot to the floor and start moving again, right? Like just
Yeah.
don't ever give up. Take one step. It's 11 miles. It feels like an eternity, but you can make it. Oof. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a tendency to also certain areas of our life just kind of give up on. After like you said, the rug's been pulled out from under us.
Yeah.
It's almost like, well, I don't want to stand on that rug anymore. And yet, if we don't get up and put ourselves in that place of vulnerability, we're never going to be able to move forward. And I think for a lot of people, that's the question that they're asking. They're sitting in their tent and they're going, "Am I going to get out and put my foot on the rug again, or am I just going to settle?" Going back to the
Yeah.
story of Nehemiah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rug was pulled out. There's rubble all around. Am I just
Yeah.
going to lay down in the rubble and
Yeah.
allow this to be the rest of my story, or am I going to do something about it?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
Mylan, there are people, I guarantee you, there are people who are listening who something's gone well. Life is going relatively well. You're up and to the right,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but you're not enjoying it. Because if life
yeah,
has taught you
yeah, yeah,
anything, that's not going to last forever. If life
yeah,
has taught you anything, it's only a matter of time before the rug gets pulled out. And that's no way to live, right? Like to
yeah.
reckon, like I say, when it's up and to the right and things are going well, enjoy it, manage expectations. You know that there's going to be a setback, but man, celebrate those good things. Fear. That's what fear does. Fear says,
Right.
yeah, you may have won that battle, but it's going to get bad again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, and you talk about looking at other people's stories and trying to find patterns and with fresh eyes. A lot of people, I used to think of successful people, they just had a different kind of gig. I mean, they had a different kind of life. They had a different set of, luck than I
Yeah.
had and all that kind of stuff. But the more I'm at this stage in my life, having had some of the experiences I'm having, or I've had, I'm reading some of their stories and I'm looking more intently at what they've been through, and I find that every person that is successful, many of them not experiencing really great success till midlife or even beyond,
Mhm.
every single one of them have a story that could rival or beat mine as far as having the rug pulled out. It's not just something that just happens to unlucky people. No, the people that have the most to be able to say, "Wow, look what has happened in my life," can tell you that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, that's been a real like, okay, I this is a common thread. This is
Yeah.
a theme that continues to repeat. Then why can't it happen for my life?
Yeah. Sure.
Sure, I've had the rug pulled out in this area or that area or a number of different areas. All of us have.
Yeah.
But are we
Yeah.
going to lay down and die, or are we going to get back up again
Yeah.
and just keep going?
Well, I mean, you know why Jesus said that in this world you will have trouble, right? Because in this world we will have trouble.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
when we talk about that there's an enemy who comes to steal, kill, and destroy, he meant that, right?
yeah,
And so we shouldn't be surprised when things are difficult
yeah,
because it rains on the just, the unjust. We're going to have difficult seasons, right? It doesn't mean we can't have joy in the midst of those things and have a purpose and a focus to keep moving beyond to try to make it those last 11 miles, right? Like Robert Scott and his men just gave
yeah.
up. Don't give up.
Well,
Yeah.
and Jesus' response to that statement, "In this world you will have trouble," was, "Take
Yeah.
heart,
Yeah, that's right.
I have overcome the world." And if we read the story of Scott, we find that what they did was they lost heart. They
Yeah.
just lost that will, that
Yeah.
desire to go forward.
Right.
And that's what we have to fight. We have to fight fear. We have to fight those voices inside of us, and maybe even some of the circumstances in our life. But we have to get up and go.
Yep.
So let's move on. Chapter
Yeah.
9.
Yeah.
I want to go to this one just because it's another fun story,
Yeah.
maybe.
Well, that's
But
all good.
detours, breakdowns, and wrong turns. So you got to
Phew.
tell us the story of the skating party.
Yeah. Yeah. So my life revolved around BMX riding during the day and during the week, and then on weekends, what the disco was to the 70s, the skating rink here in town was to us in the 80s, man. Like it
Yeah,
was the place to be. And my friend and I, John, again, he's a recurring theme through this podcast, I guess. But like John and I decided that we wanted to throw a party for our friends. we wanted to have our own skating night where we could do our own music, whatever we wanted to play, right? And the owner, who had gotten to know us over the years, and we had gotten to know him, we asked him, hey, can we do our own night? He's like, yep, you can sell 200 tickets, you guys can do it. And we're like, we got this. So like, like I say in the book, like 80s skating like nightclub, what do you call it? Not enthusiasts, but anyway, promoters. Like we're promoters, so we're
Yeah.
on the street. We're selling tickets like crazy, and we sell over 200 tickets. It's on. The
Wow.
party's on. So the night of the party or the day of the party, we're just hanging out, right? We're doing some stuff with friends, and it's summer, and I go out to a friend's house just a few miles outside of town, and hung out there for a
Because
little
you
bit.
guys are because you guys have got to be like celebrities at this point, right? You're
Oh,
hosting a party and all these people are coming. Like you said, the promoter, right? That
yeah.
person that everybody wants to come to their party.
Yeah, we're doing this. Yeah, right. So we're ready to rock, and
Yeah.
so we are all set to go. I gotta go home. I gotta get cleaned up. I gotta look good. I gotta be ready for the skating party, right? And so we're leaving, and as we're driving, listen to some music, and there's three of us in the car, and you kind of hear tick 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 tick. My friend goes, "Hey man, your car's ticking," and I'm 16 and still not mechanically inclined now to this day. But even then, I'm like, oh, I can fix that. Turn up the radio a little bit, no problem, right? Out of sight, out of mind, out of ear, no problem. And so, we're driving a little bit more. It's like bang, 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 bang. He's like, I can hear it again. And I go, I think that's got to be because we're listening for it now, right? So I just turn it up a little bit more. And man, about the third or fourth time, he's like, the guy in the back seat goes, hey, I think your car's on fire. There's just black smoke billowing out of the back of the car. And it's going, I turn the music down and it's going bang, 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 bang. And when it happens, I throw a push rod, blowing the motor, throwing a push
Yep.
rod through the oil pan. So I pull into a guy's driveway who had fresh gravel in his driveway, and oil is just pouring out into this guy's driveway. And I go into the house. The guy lets me use the phone. I call my dad. He's like, all right, we'll get a tow truck out there. I'll meet you out there. Dad calls a tow truck and starts to drive out there to find me. No GPS, just got to find me. All right. I tell him where
Right.
I'm at. So I'm like, man, I'm going to miss this party. There's no way that I'm going to miss this party. And so I go out to break the news to my friends that, and I'm sorry, guys, we're not going to make this party. And as I'm going out to the car, the guy's
And
house
it's
is
your
just,
party.
it's
That's the
my
funny part
party.
about
Yeah, if there's a name on the marquee, it is me and John, Charlie and John's skating party extravaganza, right? And so yeah, I'm like, I'm the host here, fellas. I'm walking out to the car, and the guy's house we just left. Car pulls up. Those guys pop in, and I watch them over the horizon. See you at the party. They left me. So I got to stay with the car, and they're not going to miss the party of the century, even though it's my
Yeah.
party. So they leave, and I'm just sitting there thinking, in a typical 16-year-old fashion, my life's over. Like, this
Yeah.
is it, man. This is terrible. Well, my dad, one of the most selfless guys in the world, shows up, says, all right, I'll wait for the tow truck with the car. You take the car, go home and get ready. So I made it for more than half of the party. I made quite the entrance. I'm here, everybody, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there are, and I say all that in the book to say this is that, I mean, the Bible probably says it better, right? That many are the plans of man, but it's the Lord who directs the steps.
Mhm.
Man, like there's always going to be a hitch in the giddy up. Like no matter
Yeah.
how you imagine your life playing out, no matter the well laid plans that you have, you might still get there, right? But there's probably going to be a detour or two, and you can either decide to just lay down and die on the side of the road and give up and go well, or you can just kind of go, okay, so now what? Like what? How do we pivot from here? Because the
Yeah.
goal is still the goal. The goal is still to get to that skating party. I just don't know how it's going to work, right? And
Yep.
yeah, sometimes it takes some friends or a really selfless dad to come along and be like, "I got you," right? But my experience is that if we put ourselves in that position by not giving up and pivoting and always keeping our eye on the prize, that somehow those things usually have a tendency of working themselves out or redirecting us, so we can accomplish the thing that we set our mind to in the first place.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the things that struck me as I was reading that is this idea that midlife is a time when our ego just takes a massive hit.
Yeah.
The first half of our life is all about us. I mean, as kids, we're kind of trained that way, right? Mom and dad,
Yeah.
they fed us, they took care of
Yeah.
us, everything was for us. And
Yep.
and then we go off to college, and everybody wants to know what can we do to make college, help you get a good job and get a family started. And then we're working, and everybody wants to cheer us on. And it's somewhere about midlife that everybody starts going, all right, your time to grow up. And by the way, you're not as cool as you think you are,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're not as important as you think you are. And then life
Yeah.
tells you that you're not as important as you think you are.
Yeah.
And doesn't matter if you are, the host of the party or what. All of a sudden, you begin to realize that my ego has been kind of stroking my ego and building my ego and living for what my ego wants and wants to be and how I want to be seen. Starts taking some big hits.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's been a time where I've had to really get serious about, who is this life about?
Mm.
Is it about me, or is it about the people that God has put around me, my family, the people I care about, and what role does God play in that? And
Yeah.
really, at the end of the day, am I willing to miss the party of the century that is so important to me, in order to just
Yeah.
be who God created me to be? I don't know if that made any sense, but I
100%.
think ego is a big, uh, you know that that transition of the role of ego in our lives,
Yeah.
is just huge at
Yeah.
this point.
Man, I mean, and I think there's things that remind us that we are, well, that we're not the hero of the story, and that
Yeah,
we are
yeah,
maybe not as strong and as smart and as brave as we once thought we were. I
yep,
remember, so my dad, when my dad had me, he was 49 years old when I was born, and my
mm,
mom was 42. So I had older parents, and so you do that math, and so when I'm out, dad pitching batted in practice to me when I'm a teenager, when I'm younger, man, a young teen. He's in his 60s at that point, right?
yeah,
And I remember, I'll never forget this. I remember me and some guys playing football, and my dad talking about playing football. And he's like, "I can throw a football 35 yards, no problem." I go, "Dude, there's no way, Dad. There's no." He's like, "Absolutely, I can." He hasn't thrown a football in, my guess is 3 or 4 decades, right? And he's like, "Absolutely." Like, think about that. Think about that. Like, without a young child, why is a 50-year-old throwing a football? You're not, right? You're not just,
right,
oh, me and the guy's going. And so my dad in his 60s comes out with me in the backyard. Is like, all right, we go out into the street, and he's like, run a route, 30 yards. I'll hit you in the numbers. And I watched him throw a ball that went, I would say generously, 7 yards. Like he just boom, this, right? And man, I watched his spirit. I mean, I watched him
mm,
go, oh, like it crushed him, right?
yeah,
I'll never forget that moment, man. My dad was like, "What happened?" Right? Because I
right,
remember even then, like when my dad was in his 60s, and I remember grabbing him. He was solid, but just I mean, I don't know, maybe 4 decades of rust he hadn't knocked off, or warmed up at all, but it just went nowhere, and it crushed him.
yeah,
And I think the same thing happens to us is
mm,
that instead of leveraging the gifts and the wisdom that we've developed over the years into working smarter, not harder. When we were
yeah,
younger, we're like, hey, I may not be that gifted or smart or have that much experience, but I'll grind it out for 20 hours a
right,
day, man. I'll do
yeah,
what I got to do. And you get into midlife and you go, I don't have the energy or the time because of some other commitments I have. And so you think, I'll never accomplish as much. I think we'll accomplish way more when we start
sure,
learning
yep,
about the leverage that we have, right? We can leverage our experience and our wisdom, and we work smarter, not harder. And I think there's a way larger influence we have in midlife and forward than we do. We just do it much differently. Maybe that 20-year-old's going to be able to beat me in push-ups, but I've got some life experience that I can kind of go, I don't need to do the push-ups anymore. Does that make
right,
sense? Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. So the rest of the book, and again, I'm going to show the book, and the information will be in the show notes.
Thanks.
You can pick up your own copy, and I really do encourage you to go out and get the book. The rest of the book has just a lot of practical advice. Okay, a lot of the things that we talked about are the whys. Why are we addressing this? Why is rebuilding important? How do we more of the philosophy behind it? But then there's several chapters of just practical, really good advice, and so I appreciate what you put together there, Charlie. So tell me, just as we're kind of wrapping up a little bit here, um, tell me how writing this book, what did you learn about yourself?
Mm.
Um, or about writing,
Yeah.
or about doing a project that just seemed huge,
Yeah.
in the beginning.
Yeah.
What have you learned through this process?
Yeah. Oh, you said this probably about 55 minutes ago. You said, "Hey, we don't have it. I don't have it all figured out, right?"
Yeah.
And so I wrote a book on fear and wrestled
Mm,
through fear the entire process, right? About overcoming
yeah.
fear and wrestled with it, like the fear of like very real fear. Like, so the whisper in my ear that says things like, "You're going to write this book and no one's going to read it," right?
Mm,
But
yeah.
then after sitting with that, the response is like, well, then it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, right? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
just get it out, right? And like,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I think learning about and these are and I've applied this to my spiritual life for decades now, right? But in a very practical sense, just looking at discipline of going, I don't feel like writing. I don't really have anything to say. But so like there are days where you go, I've got nothing to say today, but I'm going to sit down and I'm going to grind it out, and I may not use any of this. The only word I might use that I wrote today was the. That might be it.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna keep getting up and grinding it out, right? And I think there's really something to be said about showing up, right?
Yeah.
I wanted the
Yeah.
goal to have. Here's the thing: like I enjoy writing, I enjoy the creative process, I enjoy being creative and dreaming. I love that. But the sitting down and typing, man, that was a challenge for me, right? And I think
Sure.
there's probably people that are listening that want to start a business or renew a relationship or whatever that thing is, right? There's a million different things it could be, and the fear is keeping them like, well, it's never going to work or it's too long of a process. Just sit down and show up every
Yeah.
day in an
Yeah.
allotted time and watch, as it starts to grow. And so I've learned that I can put up with a lot more. You asked what I learned through the process. I can put up with a lot more. I can endure a lot more doubt and fear than I thought I could. I can push through that
Hmm.
stuff. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
That's
man.
cool. So, Charlie, before we go, I just want to ask: is there anything, any questions you wish I would have asked, or anything that you would have liked to share with the audience that maybe we didn't get to?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking, Mylan. I think one of my favorite lines in the book doesn't even come from me. It comes from a guy named Dawson Trotman who started the Navigators, and
Mm,
he said this: "Activity does not equal productivity." And I think that's just
mm,
so huge that
wow.
like
Yeah.
we can get really busy, and especially in midlife when we're going, "Hey, my career is really going. I'm in the middle of it. I got family stuff going on." We could just be really, really busy and not get anything done as far as like making progress on our goals or our calling. And so I think there's a real danger of confusing those two things, saying, well, I'm
Yeah.
busy, ergo I'm effective. And so
Yeah.
I always say it like this: if I'm running on a treadmill, if my goal is to get in shape, mission accomplished. If my goal is to get to my friend's house, I've done terrible. I've not moved anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the goal, right? Like I can be super
Right.
active and not accomplish anything. How many guys have gone to clean out their garage, worked all Saturday afternoon on it, gotten done, and like I just moved a few boxes. I feel like I worked all day and it's not any cleaner. Like activity does not equal productivity. And so don't confuse just because you're busy, whether it's a spiritual activity, whether it's with your family, uh, live on purpose. And so that's the thing that this whole book was about, was to say, hey, let's live our life on purpose, because I feel
Mm.
like we can be really busy but not moving ball down the field at all. So thanks for asking.
Live on purpose. Wow, that is a powerful insight.
Yep.
Thanks, man. Well, Charlie is he's a husband and a dad, and we could get into all of that stuff. What you're learning, we actually, a lot of people want to have expressed interest in knowing how to lead older kids, adult kids, things like that. So maybe we'll have to have you on for another episode.
Great.
We'll talk about that. We'll think about that. Couple questions, real quick. Number one, what's your day job, and what are you passionate about?
Yeah. So my day job is I am one of the pastors at Parkview Christian Church in Orland, and
Okay.
I primarily oversee small group ministry at
Mm,
one of our campuses. So that's my day job, and I am passionate about, in this order, right? Jesus, my family, and helping people live a life on purpose. Right, live a life that matters, and
awesome.
finding hope and purpose in Jesus. Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, we want to make sure people have an opportunity to find you and find your book and that kind of thing. Where can people find you these days?
Yeah, you can find me on the socials like at the Charlie Barclay. It sounds really pretentious, but the Charlie Barclay on Facebook and on Instagram. And yeah, and you can go to charliebarclay.com and you'll be able to find some of articles I've written. You can order the book from there, all that good stuff.
And of course, we'll put all of that in the show notes so you can go
Great.
there and check that out as
Yep.
well. Charlie, thank you so much for
Yeah, man.
coming
Thank
and
you.
being with us today, for sharing your time. I know you're a busy guy. You got a lot going on. We all are, I suppose, but just really appreciate that, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Man, means a lot, Madeline. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right. God bless, man. Hey, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Charlie Barkley. He's always a lot of fun, and I'll probably have him on the podcast again in the future. I did want to direct you to the show notes. We've got a lot of information there where you can find his book, find Charlie on socials and his website, and also find information about the company and the person that helped him with his book to edit and produce his book. So, hope you'll go there and find the information you need there. Also wanted to remind you to go check out our Facebook group, and I'm going to have a link for that in the show notes as well. Um, Next episode is Robin Shear. Robin is a joy coach, and if you've never met a joy coach, that's a pretty valuable coach. I think we all need a little bit of help learning to find joy, especially in our midlife years when we're dealing with crises and challenges that come along with that season of life. So I hope you'll join in on our next episode with Robin Shear. God bless. Have a great week, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.